Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be about how to play the game of warming and cooling in order to create a convincing lighting effect in your paintings. I included my reference photo here. You are welcome to paint from that. If you do share it publicly, just make sure to tag me. Otherwise, it's a great little reference photo. The light spilling in through the window is so beautiful. I actually took this photo when I was teaching an international painting retreat over in France. We had a chateau for a week. It was as magical as it sounds. If you want to learn more about retreats, I have a whole podcast dedicated to it, so I won't fill up this video with that, but let's just say it was beautiful and stunning. And one more note about the reference photo, you can see through the window, there's this thin strip of yellow. Basically, in the French countryside where we were staying, they plant a lot of canola. At least that's what we call it in the US. They call it rapeseed, but it's this really bright, vivid, beautiful yellow color. And I kept eyeing it throughout the windows and off in the distance, and I told myself that I would try to paint it at one point, and it did make it into this image. Even though it's just slight, I do feel like it still kind of works as the focal point, which is really lovely, even though it's, I don't know, probably 1 or 2% of the overall composition. Okay, but let's talk about warming and cooling. So basically there is two general ways whenever you're painting representationally to create the light effect. So I'm sure you know it. It's one of those things where you kind of, when you see it, you know it. It's hard to explain. But in some compositions, light just pops. It almost feels like the painting itself is being illuminated. And in other paintings, even though everything kind of feels like it should work out, the light doesn't always pop. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first is value. So value is just how light or how dark a specific color is in the composition. And whenever you're painting a light effect, you really have to make sure that your values are accurate, and even to the point where they're maybe ever so slightly exaggerated in order to create the contrast needed in order for light to make sense. Light also tends to follow a certain hierarchy that you have to follow. That is the lit part of the form, the halftones, the shadow, the core shadows, the cast shadows. I'll put a diagram up right here. All kind of have to fall in order. Everything that is within light or is lit has to be lighter than everything that's dark or in shadow. And obviously when you're looking in real life, some things don't quite play that game. I know whenever I take a photo specifically, sometimes the camera will sort of average out some of the contrast. So in the photo, you can see the walls appear lighter than I remember them looking in real life. The light effect was much stronger. Also the couch, some of the reds are a little brighter and lighter. And in order to create that really nice crisp light effect, I had to try to mimic what I was seeing in real life, which is that there was a pretty striking contrast between the light through the window, cast onto the couch, and a little bit onto the coffee table with the books on it. One of the ways I kind of left a note for myself. So one thing about painting is sometimes you think that like if you're a good painter, you're just so masterful, you can sort of juggle all these balls and you always know what's going on. For me anyways, that's not the case. A lot of my painting process, whether it's underpainting, redraws, whatever, is about leaving notes for my future self so I can make better, more informed decisions. And in this case, my underpainting was something that was informing not only the color, but that game of warming and cooling, and specifically the value. So one of the ways I did this was with my underpainting, anywhere that I felt like light was hitting it, I made it that bright yellow color. And when I paint, I don't always 100% cover the background. So not only will that lighter color help me to make lighter value choices when I'm blocking in and covering it up, but where I don't completely cover it up, the little peaks of yellow are going to help that light effect make more sense. Which brings us to the other aspect of warming and cooling, or creating that lighting effect. And that is color temperature. So anything that is in light tends to be warmer, and anything that is cast in shadow tends to be cooler. Now I'm going to take one step backwards here and talk about what I mean by playing a game. When I was in college and I was learning about warming and cooling, my painting professor introduced it to us like this. He said that, you know, outside of the very basic fundamentals of painting representationally, The way you choose to depict the world in a painting comes down to what game as a painter you're wanting to play. And I'm sure you've heard the term like there are no rules in painting, and that's so true. And anytime I teach, I always kind of start out with my little preamble to all my students, because I really struggle with jumping into a group of people I've never met and start throwing around words like should and ought to and it's important to. Because yes, there are no rules in painting. You know, you can paint abstractly and you can paint whatever you want. However, once you decide that you're wanting to paint representationally, now we do start to have some rules, and not everyone has to follow them the same way. Obviously, some painters who paint representationally paint almost like a photorealistic version of what they're looking at, and other people will use the term realism super lightly. And that's fine. They're all representational. And when you start painting representationally, especially if you aren't going for perfect photorealism, where you do need some more strict rules in order to understand how to depict that, you can start kind of as an artist making up your own rules and thereby your own games that you're playing. So when you play the game of warming and cooling, it really dictates the chroma and the temperature of everything. So whenever I paint anything with direct light, which this photo has direct light, you can see it cast on the couch, I always say everything that is in shadow is going to be depicted cooler than it actually is in real life or my reference photo. And sometimes it's more exaggerated, like the walls, for example, are much cooler. They're really almost probably a warm white on my reference photo if I look at it. And I want the lights of the couch to have more color contrast. They have a lot of value contrast. That is, they're much lighter than the shadowy parts of the painting. But in order to really drive home that sense of light and help it to pop, I want my color and value to both be playing the same game. I want them both to be working in the same direction. So because of that, everything in shadow, I'm going to cool down ever so slightly. And everything in light, I'm going to warm up ever so slightly. And warm and cool basically just means its position on the color wheel. So if we have a color wheel, we know that there are warm and cool colors, right? Red, orange, yellow are typically our warm colors. And then green, blue, and violet or purple are our cool colors. But it's also important to note that every single color has a warm and cool version of it. So if you know, I didn't mention brown or gray or khaki or a whole bunch of colors when I listed out those 6 colors. However, all of those colors, gray, brown, whatever, have warm and cool of each of them. There are warm grays, which are going to lean a little more of that greeny kind of color. And then there are cool grays that are going to lean violet or even blue. You have warm browns, and most browns are just low intensity warm colors, so they all tend to lean warm anyways. But even within the context of a low intensity warm color, you have cool and warm versions. You know, a warm brown would be very red, like a burnt sienna, and a cool brown might lean more green khaki. And of course, the one part that always trips up everyone, and admittedly tripped me up for a lot longer than I'd like to admit, is what about, you know, a warm blue or a cool orange. Blue and orange are said to be kind of the most extremes of warming and cooling. Blue is your coolest of the cool, and orange is your warmest of the warm. If you look it up, a warm blue is going to be a blue that leans a little bit more green, and a cool orange is going to be an orange that leans a little bit more red or almost like a pink color. And I used to think for a long time that you just sort of had to memorize which one was which and sort of take, you know, the old masters who came before us, take their word for it. And certainly there are some times that I'll just do that. I don't know exactly why there's an art rule. I'll just take it for face value. But the older I get and the more I teach, the more I like to know, okay, but why? And when it comes to warming and cooling, here's one good way to think about it. So you have warm and cool light. And this typically, if you've ever used photo editing tools, you notice that there is a slider of warm and cool, and it's not blue and orange, rather blue and yellow. And so one of the ways I think of it is a color under cool light will look cooler, and a color under warm light will look warmer. Now, that seems obvious, but if you take blue, for example, and put it under a warm light, it's going to pull green, because blue plus yellow is green. And if you put orange under a cool light, it's going to pull a little bit more red. So that's kind of where it's getting at. So the warmest of the warm axis would be a yellowy orange, and a blue would be a blue that pulls pretty true. It doesn't pull either green or violet, but it's more of a, it would lean more in the direction of violet than green. You know, an example of a warm blue would be a phthalo blue green shade, and an example of a cool orange is going to be something like a permanent orange, or like more specifically a pyrrole orange. And one of the ways I figured out that this was a good option for a cool orange was by mixing in titanium white, which already sort of cools colors down anyways. And you can see that if you mix pyrrole orange, titanium white, you get this perfect like hot pink flamingo color, which is cooler than, let's say, a cadmium orange, which is kind of the gold standard for the warmest color on a palette. Okay, so if that seemed really meta, I can always make another video and kind of explain it. All you need to know is that every color you choose, if it's in light, you would mix it to the correct value and also consider warming it. So if you have like this orange on this couch where the light is hitting it, it's going to be lighter, but I'm not adding white, I'm adding yellow to not only lighten the value, but also to create that warmth. Same with shadows. I'm cooling down the color of the wall by adding more blues to it to both darken it to get the value correct, but also to cool it down so it plays that game of warming and cooling in my painting. And now I will reiterate that the most important aspect of light reading is the value. If you're doing the warming and cooling and you're still not getting light to make sense, I would definitely recommend checking your values. You really can paint a painting any colors you want, and if the values are accurate, you can kind of get away with a lot more than you think. But I also really like the idea of sort of double down on that lighting effect by using both of those strategies
Basically,
together.
the next time you work on a painting, and if one of your goals is to really have light that sort of pops and looks realistic and luminous, try keeping both of those things in the front of your mind. Even write them down on a sticky note and sort of ask yourself when you're making big color choices, does this have the correct value? And also, is this playing that game of warming and cooling? If you're interested to learn more, you can always ask me to elaborate and I'll make another video for you guys. I really enjoyed making videos for YouTube. I also have a book coming out. It is Modern Still Life from Fruit Bowls to Disco Balls. You can pre-order it now. It'll be out in June of 2024. I'm super proud of it. I have a whole chapter dedicated to warming and cooling. Thank you guys for watching. Happy creating, and I'll talk to you in next week's video.